maybe you did some good. Maybe you did like me and didn't do so well. But looking forward to more college football today, and of course week 2. So we'll give everybody a couple minutes, see if anybody joins in, and or get any more joined in, and see what happens there. But not a ton to go over today, but plenty, I guess. Yesterday we had about 11, or I think exactly 11 Power 5 games where it was matchups between Power 5 schools. So we'll go over those and also look at some of these games that weren't Power 5 schools and see how they did and see if we, see what everybody thought. So adjust this a little bit, get more of my head instead of cutting off my forehead there. But come on. It's early on Sunday morning, so we still got about another minute before I said I was going to go live at 9 a.m. So if you're picking this up later, you may want to fast forward just a few seconds. This was the first time this season, obviously, that I've done the live stream. It's been about a year or so since we've done it, so hoping to do this every Sunday, but trying to work out the kinks and trying to make sure I've got it right on my end, which I still don't know if I do. Things like chat and everything, hoping that works a little bit better this time and see what happens there. So it says that we have live chat, but I'm not 100% on that. So, all right, well, it's 9 o'clock. I'm gonna go ahead and get started, and we'll see as people join in. We'll go through some of these games. You can always back up these videos as soon as they're uploaded. They do go to the playlist. I'll move it over to the 2018 college football playlist, and we'll go from there. So we'll start with the SEC. There was a couple good games in the SEC, a couple things that stood out, and of course that game with Auburn and Washington was the big game of the day. You did have Alabama and Louisville playing last night, which Alabama looked strong. They definitely looked like they could get some work done, especially defensively. I think that quarterback battle is over. I honestly felt like there wasn't much of a battle coming into the season. I know Jalen was 26-2 or whatever he was as a starter, but overall, to give us a better chance of winning, I felt like we needed somebody who could at least go through more than one progression on their passing. So got that with Tua. The guy is just a playmaker. He looks downfield constantly. He never takes it's like he's never just in the pocket and worried about rushers. He's always looking down the field, which is, you can't teach that. So we'll go ahead and get started. The first game was on Thursday, and that was with A&M and Northwestern State. Obviously, we knew that A&M was going to come this game. This was a cupcake. It did take A&M a little while to get started, which is expected. The brand new coaching staff coming in, what could you expect more? They had a lot to get used to in that game. So 59-7 there, not even a close game. Once A&M got started in the second quarter, after the first quarter was only 7-0, and then they turned it on, scoring a lot in the second and third. And I'm sure by then their starters were out, and they finished up with one score in the fourth. As far as Austin Peay and Georgia yesterday, Georgia came out looking strong. They scored quickly, scoring 17 in the first, 21 in the second. No big deal there. Georgia, we knew they had depth, those running backs. Losing the two they did last year with Chubb and Michelle, that was a big deal as far as experience. Not such a big deal in my opinion as far as talent. Their talent did not drop off. Let's see. I forgot about a game there, a big game with West Virginia and Tennessee. So that game, especially in the first half, was a lot better of a game than I actually expected. I expected West Virginia to come out and be able to throw the ball pretty quick, and they didn't. They came out and they did put up some quick points, but overall wasn't what they wanted to get started with. Now in the second half, they really turned it on, and that game was in rain delay, lightning delay, which was the case for a lot of games yesterday. We even had some canceled yesterday. The Nebraska game did get canceled, so a lot of games across the country had those rain delays, had that problem from the start. But either way, West Virginia did get the win yesterday, 40-14. Now, as far as Tennessee, this is another brand new coaching staff with Jeremy Pruitt. This was Alabama's defensive coordinator last season. He was the Alabama high school head coach for years. Has come up through the ranks in college as defensive coordinators at places like Georgia, Alabama, and then now he's getting his head coaching start up there in Knoxville. So we know that's going to be a very tough defensive-minded team at years to come. He's just not got a lot of talent this year. Nothing too far out of reach there, though. There's some good recruiting in that area. If they can dip down into Georgia at all, as they used to during the late 90s when they won their championship, early 2000s, that's where Philip Fulmer recruited heavily, was in North Georgia, and they did big there. But saying that is no easy feat, because now you've got to deal with Georgia itself. So that battle there is going to be uphill as far as recruiting. But if he can get a good stance on Tennessee, maybe drop into Kentucky every now and then, get a player or two, and North Georgia, he'll be fine. Mississippi State took care of business yesterday, 63-6. No shock there, playing Stephen F. Austin. Wasn't big. They took, come out, didn't even have their starting quarterback. Fitzgerald was suspended yesterday for something he did back in March. Either way, yesterday they did fine, coming out scoring quickly, and held that. Every quarter they scored double-digit points. So pretty solid showing by Mississippi State. Coastal Carolina did come out yesterday, and I believe, I may be wrong about this, but I believe this was the first year of them being in Division 1A or FBS. I could be wrong about that, but I think this was their very first game. They did lose to South Carolina 49-15. So starting to get some folks on here. You can always go back. Like I said, I've been to SEC right now. Thanks for joining. So hopefully you get some good information today as we talk about what happened yesterday and move into games that are coming up. Next up, we had Ole Miss and Texas Tech. Now, this game did shock me. I actually expected Texas Tech not to come out and win by a lot. I thought this game was going to be a lot closer, though. 20-point margin there, with Ole Miss getting the win, 47-27. Ole Miss came out ready to play. Their defense looked better at times. They've still got a lot of work to do, especially stopping the run, which we know in the SEC is going to be tough because every team runs the ball predominantly. Even with the spread offenses that are in the SEC, you still have a lot of controlling the clock, run the ball. So Ole Miss has got to stop this run game, which Texas Tech last year, and looks like what they'll be focused on this year, is running the ball a lot more than they were used to seeing them. Central Michigan came down, and Kentucky actually played a lot better than I expected them to. I thought this game was going to be pretty close. Now, Kentucky was a 17-point favorite in this game, but it's Kentucky, and Central Michigan is traditionally a good MAC school. So maybe, Kentucky's got a little bit better than I thought, but I don't know a lot about Central Michigan, what they have this year. CMU actually scored all 20 of their points in the first half of the game. So Kentucky, that says a little bit about their defense. Maybe they made some adjustments at halftime, come out, held them scoreless the rest of the way. Missouri, who I'm actually pretty high on this year and felt like they're going to be pretty good, it came out yesterday and won 51-14, but it was UT Martin, so nothing, you can't really pick up a lot there. Looks like Drew Lock did throw for 4 touchdowns and 289 yards. I'm sure that came in the first half because there was 38 points alone scored in the first half for them. Arkansas got a 35-point victory. Their spread yesterday, when it came out, was 35 points. Sometimes it amazes me how these odds makers can do this kind of stuff. Especially with a score like 55-20. How do you predict that Eastern Illinois is going to score 20 points exactly, not 21, not 17? That's crazy to me. But anyways, Florida takes care of business against Charleston Southern. Florida came out in the first quarter, scored early, then had a little bit of kind of settled in a little bit, and then that second quarter they scored 4 touchdowns. So they come out in Mullen's first game there. Like I've said in the preview video, I think that is the hire of the year. I know a lot of people are big on Scott Frost, and they should be. In my opinion, Florida's hire of Dan Mullen was bigger than Scott Frost. Just knowing and being, relative close to that program, as far as you hear a lot about it in the area of the country I'm in, that was a huge hire, and we know what Dan Mullen can do. And then last, we have Vanderbilt and Middle Tennessee. Vandy actually come out and took care of business. They were only a field goal favorite, I believe, 3 or 3.5. They took care of business, beating MTSU 35-7. So big victory for them. That seems to be they've kind of started a first game of the year tradition there between those two schools, which are very close. I think they're like 10 miles apart, so it makes sense. As far as now, I'll talk about Louisville and Alabama, and also Auburn, Washington. So if you watched the video I put out on Wednesday, you know that I took the over in the Washington-Auburn game, which was a contrarian play. At that time, it looked like everybody was on the under. Now, there was some money come in late on the over because that line got pushed up to almost 50. We had over 48. That game, very frustrating because Auburn comes out, wide open, goes down, scores a touchdown quick. I believe they had actually kicked off to Washington, got a 3 and out, and I was thinking, ugh. And then Auburn gets the ball. They drive down the field, score a touchdown quick. They get the ball again, drive down. They have to go for a field goal. They get inside the 20, have to go for a field goal. And I'm thinking, well, at least we got points here. Let's keep moving. At about the 4th field goal, it started to seem like neither team could just punch it in. Washington was trying to make a push there, and they actually did score a touchdown with like a minute left in the first half. And I'm thinking, we're at halftime, and I believe it was 15-13. That's 28 points total. They'll come out in the second half. If we hit 3 touchdowns, we're good. Even with all those field goals, we even had some missed field goals. We had some, I think there was at least 2 missed field goals in that game. And it was just so frustrating because even with all those field goals that we had, they still scored 37. So we were only 11 points from pushing. Obviously, 2 touchdowns would have got us a win on that. But at the same time, it's hard to think that that was a bad handicapping in that game, because if they could have just finished those out at all, just a couple of those drives, instead of having to go for a field goal inside the 20, I think there was 3 trips in the first half where either one of those teams actually got inside the 5. We had 1 missed field goal, 1 touchdown, and 1 field goal. So 10 points out of 21 potential points, missed opportunities or whatnot. But either way, there was a ton of yards put up in that game. Let's see, I've got it wrote down somewhere. Okay, 818 yards total between those two teams. It's hard to say that an 818-yard game would not score 7 touchdowns. In this case, it didn't. The defensive did a great job once the offense got inside the 20. So I guess they bend but don't break. That kind of mentality worked great yesterday in that game. Not so well for us. Either way, moving along, Alabama and Louisville, like I said at the first of the video, Alabama did look good at certain times. Their defense was struggling a little bit more than I actually thought they would, as far as just some of the plays they were leaving wide receivers wide open. Now, this is, of course, Louisville they were playing. Wasn't like they were playing, Austin Peay or Stephen F. Austin or something like that. We're talking a legit team that's been a contender the last couple of years. Now, is Louisville the level that they have been? No, not by far. But there was players wide open at certain times on crossing patterns, Some of our linebackers did not look like they knew what was going on. And Mack Wilson is a headhunter, and he just kind of, at times he showed greatness, and at other times he kind of didn't know who to cover. So it was kind of frustrating at times there, but still come out with a 51-14 victory. Still don't seem to be able to find a kicker. This is a year in, a year out thing for Alabama, is finding a kicker. Now this one, I think he transferred in from Temple as a grad transfer. Was lights out up there for a while, and then gets to Alabama and starts missing them. But either way, Bama looks good as far as rushing the ball. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I don't think this is a quarterback competition at all. I think Tua is definitely the one, he won the starting job. Jalen played some. Jalen just doesn't seem there. And Tua is definitely a talent. So I think moving forward, that'll be the team there. Now, as far as SEC games, we do actually have one today. It's that LSU and Miami game, playing tonight at 7:30 Eastern Time. That is still around a 3.5 point game. Miami with the favorite there, and that line has not moved hardly at all. So I don't expect that to move a lot, maybe a point or so as the game gets closer to time. But it looks like Miami's going to stay the favorite, I would think, throughout the start of that game. So that wraps it up for the SEC. Now we'll move into the Pac-12. Pac-12 had some games that I thought, definitely looked the way I thought they would. Other games or other teams did not look how I thought they would. As far as, with that said, I'll go over a topic real quick before I get into the Pac-12, and that is high points. Teams that I thought exactly came out and played exactly how I projected. UCLA did not look good at home, losing to Cincinnati, and I watched most of that game. They lost Wilton Speak, the transfer in from Michigan at quarterback, and after that, they don't have the talent just yet to compete like they should. Cincinnati really pushed UCLA around in that game a lot, so that game should have probably actually been further out of reach than it was. Late touchdown for Cincinnati made the score look a little bit worse than, realistically, they were up by 2 and like a minute left. They scored a touchdown, but they actually should have scored a little bit more against them. Auburn and Washington in that game, they came out lights out. Both those teams looked very good on both sides of the ball. I know they gave up 818 yards, but both of those teams are going to settle in. I think those two are contenders, which is exactly, I had Washington at 11-1, winning the Pac-12. I had them losing to Auburn, so that was kind of the way that went. And we'll see what Auburn can do the rest of the year. The rest of the year, I've got Auburn actually coming in third, which their offensive line at times looked a little rough. But now going up against Washington, you had to expect that. Now, teams that did not look the way I thought they would, 3 of them stood out to me. First one is Arizona in the Pac-12. Losing to BYU, I actually thought they would come in and play a little better. I got them finishing high in the Pac-12 South. Michigan just did not come ready to play yesterday. We'll get into that game soon. And then Texas, which we'll get into when we go into Big 12. They just absolutely, whatever reason, Maryland has something, figured out about Texas. And all the rest of these Big 12 teams are going to be watching that, because 2 years in a row, Maryland has come in and thumped Texas. And even though the score wasn't that bad, still pushed them around. Had a pretty good lead early in the game. So that's going to be rough. But either way, we'll move right along into the Pac-12. Back on Thursday night, Utah gets a win against Weber State. Nothing big there. They scored in every quarter. 41-10 was the final. On Friday night, you had Stanford against San Diego State. I didn't get to watch that game. I did notice that Bryce Love did not have that good a game. But that may have been, like I said, I didn't watch it. That may have been him, getting saved as far as they didn't want to really push him out there and get a lot done with him or get him hurt or something like that. They need him for the rest of the year. So Stanford, either way, gets the win 31-10. And then Colorado beating up on Colorado State 45-13. Colorado State looks not so good. Colorado actually came out and played pretty well in this game. This is a rivalry game, so when one team gets the edge, they're going to hold the gas down. They're going to continue to run as hard as they can, and that kind of showed up there. As far as yesterday goes, Ohio State beat up on Oregon State 77-31. That game was pretty bad. That was one of the games that had a delay for Lightning. And when they come back out, actually Oregon State came in and started putting up some points. Put up 31 on Ohio State, and obviously Ohio State at that time, I believe, was up like 50-something to 7 when they started putting those points up. So their defense, I'm sure, was taking their foot off the gas and kind of let them score some points there. But either way, Ohio State got a little bit of momentum back going into the fourth quarter, put up 3 touchdowns and steal that game pretty easily. We've already talked about the Auburn-Washington game. USC yesterday actually found themselves down after the first quarter to UNLV, but they did come out and put up a strong second quarter, and especially the fourth quarter, where they scored 24 points and won that game 43-21. Oregon yesterday came out. Justin Herbert is really good, guys. This guy is he's legit, and he was last year. I've talked about it before. Last year when he was playing, Oregon was a legit team. When he was out, which he was for a while, they just wasn't the same team. So if he can stay healthy, Oregon is going to be very good this year. I think I got him finishing second in the Pac-12 North. That means if I remember right, I've got Stanford finishing third. Oregon, if they keep Justin Herbert, like I said, they're going to be legit. Washington State yesterday, at one time, was a very close game with Wyoming. This was a low spread. Wyoming played last week. They had a little got the rust off last week in a win. They came in this game. The spread was only like 2 points in this game. So Washington State, for their first game of the year, came out, and this game was, I believe, 20-19 for a while, or at least in the going into the third quarter. And then Washington State kind of took control in the fourth quarter, scoring 3 touchdowns and won that game going away 41-19. North Carolina and Cal yesterday. Cal came out and looked good. One thing that stood out to me was the fact that North Carolina kind of came back, scored 14 unanswered in the fourth quarter, got things going, and actually I believe kicked an onside kick and recovered it, but couldn't do anything with it. But at the same time, North Carolina turned the ball over 4 times to Cal didn't have any turnovers. And this game only finished at 7 points. It's 24-17. So if North Carolina could have took care of the ball, there was a good chance that they would have won that game against Cal. Cincinnati and UCLA, we mentioned that earlier. UCLA just not look good. They've definitely got figured out a quarterback with Wilton Speak getting hurt. Cincinnati looked good. Luke Fickell, if you remember him, he actually took over at Ohio State right before Urban Meyer got there. He was the interim coach and actually stayed on that staff after Urban got there for a few years, and then now has taken over the Cincinnati job. I believe this is his second year, maybe his third, as the head coach up there, and he was excited after that game. So I think that was a hard fought. That was probably that game they had up on their wall the entire summer getting ready for. Arizona State yesterday came out and looked really good against UTSA. I know UTSA is not a juggernaut or anything, but Arizona State put up some points. They scored 14 in the first 3 quarters, each of the first 3 quarters, and 7 to finish it off. They win that game 49-7. So Arizona State came out with firing power. Manny Wilkins threw for 237 yards and 4 touchdowns. So he's definitely, he was 16-24, so that's a good thing for them. They had a running back go for 131 yards. That's definitely good for them. And then last in the Pac-12 we talked about earlier was Arizona. That did not look good, and them losing to BYU really did shock me. BYU was not a good team last year. Obviously, was trying to bounce back. They worked on a lot of things during the offseason, but Arizona should have won this game. Khalil Tate did not have a big night like everybody expected. They figured out a way to stop him. Other teams are going to be looking at what BYU did there. So kind of worried about Arizona as far as the year goes on. That does finish up the Pac-12. They don't have any other games going on this week. So as far as things that happened yesterday, as far as the picks that I had, also we talked about, did not go so well. Went 0-2 yesterday. We talked about the Auburn and Washington game, how frustrating that was. That we had the over, and all those field goals, and even a couple missed field goals knocked us out there. And then the fact we have Michigan +1, and Michigan, we're about to get into the Big Ten. We'll go ahead and talk about them. They just did not look good at all. They came out flat as you possibly could. Notre Dame is a good team, and I have them doing very well this year. But at the same time, Michigan with that defense should have been able to stop Wimbush. And last year at the end of the year, Miami figured out how to stop him. In the last couple games of the year, teams did not have a problem with him. And yesterday it was like Michigan came out and hadn't watched any film or anything. I don't know what happened there. They just kind of played really flat. I think they were expecting a lot more out of Shea Patterson. And one thing, watching him at Ole Miss the last couple of years, was the fact that he's very, I don't know, he tries to do too much, I guess. He has that, those moments where he threw an interception last night off his back foot. He's done that multiple times. He did that a lot at Ole Miss. He ended up there at the end of the game there, had the ball, had a chance to maybe tie it up. He fumbles the ball. He's holding it out here in one hand. And I know he's in the backfield. He's trying to scramble. But at the same time, if you're trying to scramble, maybe tuck that ball a little bit tighter. And he's done that several times in the past. So that's something to worry about. I was hoping he would be, obviously I was very high on Michigan this year. That defense was the number one reason I was high on Michigan this year. They've got talent on offense, but that defense was loaded. And last night they came out and played nothing special. I mean, Notre Dame at home came out, and Notre Dame can put up points. We know that, but Notre Dame's obviously got talent. They've always had talent and always will. But at the same time, I was just expecting more out of Michigan here, and they did not bring their A game. Now, when I projected this game, I projected Michigan as a 2-point favorite. So I only had a 4-point difference from what the actual line is. This, I like to stay a touchdown or above. I kind of pressed this one because I just had a feeling about it. Obviously, I was wrong. But going back and looking at it, man, there's so many clues that I just missed. And number one is something that amazes me, and I actually mentioned it earlier in one of those games, was these odds makers. So back in May, Chris Andrews is one of the best at this, and he works for the South Point. I think he's like the head odds maker there. And back on, I believe, Memorial Day, they released the games of the year. He had Notre Dame at -7, so right where it finished. The game finished 24-17. He nailed it. There was so much money coming in so quickly in the first day or so. I think on Memorial Day is when they released it. So obviously you've got a lot of tourists in the area. Michigan is a public team, but a lot of people came in and actually pounded that line down, I think all the way down to Notre Dame -2. Yesterday before this game got started, it was Michigan -3. So a full 10-point swing there in a big-time game. Obviously game day was there yesterday. It was a primetime game on NBC, the Notre Dame broadcasting channel, and that's what I think it might as well stand for. But anyways, that game was pushed out. He nailed it. And I think sometimes in the future, we've got to look at, especially, I say we, I talk to you guys like you're all sitting right here, but that's part of going live, I guess. But I've got to look at, swings like that and try to avoid those games. Even if you feel like there's one side, maybe pass on it for that reason, like what happened last night. Obviously, you can't predict a team coming out flat. You don't know, what their reasoning was, what the locker room was like right before the game. But there was definitely a reason he set that line at -7, and it came right. He nailed it. But either way, let's jump into the Big Ten. So back on Thursday, there were actually two games, one of them not so big, which was Minnesota, who won 48-10 over New Mexico State. That is a pretty good score, even over New Mexico State, who's not strong. but simply because that a walk-on freshman quarterback who got the starting job from Minnesota came out and did pretty well, I think. The other game was a big game. It was Northwestern or Purdue. This game I actually had at 58.5. They scored 58 in this game, so I was pretty happy about that. As far as just the total, I did have the wrong favorite. I had Purdue at -1, which was still within the Purdue -3, what it got up to. But Northwestern come out and wins this game by 4, 31-27. As far as Friday night, Wisconsin got started. They obviously looked very well against Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky is not the same team they were a few years ago when Jeff Brom left. The new guy that come in last year. I don't know him, don't know anything about him. It's just that's not the same team that it was when Brom was there or when Willie Taggart was there before him. Michigan State had a little trouble with Utah State Friday night. I think that's obviously a overlooking thing there. They should have been a lot more prepared for that game. They weren't. So we'll see what happens on that one, and that gets us into another topic I'll talk about in a little bit. But either way, on Saturday, we've talked about the Oregon State-Ohio State game last night. Penn State and Appalachian State, 11 years to the day of App State beating Michigan. And they come in yesterday ready to play. They took Penn State to overtime, where they did end up losing the game. Penn State gets the win 45-38, but App State come in ready to play that game. Penn State obviously was overlooking them or something. I don't think that was a reflection of how good Penn State is. I still think they're very good, but that game, they gave them everything they could possibly handle. And if it wouldn't have been for a few plays there at the end of the game, that would have been another win by App State over a Big Ten school on opening weekend. We've already talked about the Michigan-Notre Dame game. The next game we'll talk about is Kent State and Illinois. Illinois actually wins this game on a late touchdown and gets a win over Kent State, which, kind of shows you how weak Illinois is. I don't know a lot about Kent State, but I don't feel like a MAC school should come into a Big Ten school and hold them to a 7-point victory. Rutgers gets a win over Texas State. Not a big game there, but at the same time, Rutgers scoring 35 and scoring in every quarter at that is a big deal for them. Iowa looked good yesterday late. First half, that game was a very good game going into halftime, 3-0 over Northern Illinois. After halftime, Iowa came out on fire. They made some obvious adjustments in halftime and came out and won that game 33-7. Indiana gets a win over Florida International, which Florida International is not a bad team. But Indiana, either way, goes to Florida International, by the way. They traveled to that Conference USA school and did win 38-28. Butch Jones, can't even think of his name now. But anyways, one of the old Miami coaches is actually a coach at Florida International now. And then Nebraska and Akron did get canceled yesterday, so we didn't get to see Scott Frost in his first game. Rain and lightning, and I think there was a lot more coming through the system coming through that area, so they went ahead and canceled that game. So we still don't know anything about Scott Frost and Nebraska. Now there was one other game we talked about, and it kind of will tie us finishing up the Big Ten and moving into the Big 12, and that is Texas and Maryland. Now obviously, if you watch my preseason videos, just like Michigan, I was high on Texas, and I'm hoping that this was just a anomaly or whatever you want to call it. But Maryland comes out, takes a big lead in the first half, 24-7 at one point. Texas made a run at the end of the first half, bringing that back up to 24-22. They go into halftime. Texas comes out in the third quarter, scores a touchdown, takes the lead 29-24. And I'm thinking at this point, great, we'll just start. Maybe they've woke up. They'll just take control and move on, get the win, cover, and move on. Opposite happened. Maryland goes down the very start of the fourth quarter, scores a touchdown, kicks the extra point, and immediately they go into a lightning delay. So Maryland at this point is taking the lead back 31-29. I'm hoping that Texas can come out and get the win. They still got a full quarter to go. Did not happen. Maryland actually put up another field goal, and finished up the game 34-29. For whatever reason, this was a home and home. And both years, Maryland has beat Tom Herman and the Longhorns. So don't know what's going on there, but obviously Maryland was able to find something against this team both years, and it worked. So hopefully Texas can bounce back from this. They bounced back pretty good last year from this. Played a little bit better, even though I think last year the next game they lost to USC, which they have USC coming in 2 weeks, I believe. Next, not this week, but week 3. Hopefully Texas can get some things going and bounce back from this pretty quick. Otherwise, they're going to have a long year, and I'm going to completely miss them. So hopefully that doesn't happen. That finishes up the Big 10. Now we'll talk about the Big 12 real quick. Not a lot of big games in this division at all. Oklahoma State back on Thursday took care of business over Missouri State, 58-17. Oklahoma yesterday looked really good against Florida Atlantic. Now you know this game, it moved from, I believe it opened up Oklahoma at minus 24 during the summer, and all the way up to yesterday, it continued to move towards Florida Atlantic. Florida Atlantic was getting a lot of money. A lot of people was on that lane train, and I know that Florida Atlantic did very well last year, but this Oklahoma heard it all summer how Florida Atlantic was going to come in there and give them a game, and they come out and thumped them. This game got all the way down to, I believe, 18 before kickoff, and then came back towards Oklahoma a little bit, and ended up 63-14. That was a complete thumping of Oklahoma. Batters on Florida Atlantic were out before the end of the first quarter. They were already losing. So a big game there for them. TCU takes care of business yesterday, 55-7. That new quarterback for TCU threw for 182 yards and 3 touchdowns against Southern. So not a lot to say there, but TCU looked good at home. We've already talked about West Virginia and Tennessee, Texas and Maryland, Ole Miss and Texas Tech. Disappointing, Kansas loses this game to Nicholls State, 26-23. Kansas State was behind South Dakota for a long time, ended up getting the win 27-24, but those two teams look rough, and I actually was not big on Kansas State this year. They play Mississippi State coming up, and I think that's going to be a drubbing for Mississippi State for them. Abilene Christian and Baylor played yesterday. Baylor does get the win. ACU did play pretty well against them, all considered. Baylor's not that great of a team, but I do think they're better this year, obviously, than they were last year. I think Baylor ends up with 6 wins. They get their first one yesterday, which is a complete opposite of being a 30-point favorite last year in the opener to Liberty and losing that game outright. Iowa State and South Dakota State did get canceled yesterday, so that was 2 games at least that got canceled. Nebraska and Iowa State losing their first games to weather. And that wraps up the Big 12. So we'll go into the ACC, and then we'll look at some stuff for next week. Appreciate you watching this thing as long as you have. The first thing we'll talk about in the ACC was on Thursday night, Wake Forest had to go to overtime against Tulane to win that game 23-17. Tulane did not look bad. I watched that game. Wake Forest did not look terrible. They obviously have some room to grow very quickly, but Tulane came ready to play for that game. So that was not, I don't think that was a terrible game, I guess you could say. I don't really, for lack of words, but was a good game to watch. Friday night, Syracuse takes care of business on the road, 55-42. They actually let Western Michigan come back on them for a little bit, and then they come back and took the lead late in the game to finish it up 55-42. Duke looked pretty well, winning against Army 34-14. Duke come out and moved the ball well, stopped Army. Army is no slouch. We know this. The last couple of years they've been getting better and better. I believe Army won 10 games last year, including against Duke. So this, that's not a bad non-conference game for a team like Duke. We've talked about Louisville and Alabama. Furman and Clemson. Clemson came out, played both of their quarterbacks, won the game big, 48-7. North Carolina State had a little trouble with James Madison. Obviously, James Madison, one of the top teams in FCS, so this was not a bad game for North Carolina State, but they barely did get the win, 24-13. 11-point victory there over a solid FCS team is not terrible. Georgia Tech comes out as a 41-point favorite and wins the game 41-0. Those kind of things just really blow my mind how somebody can predict that against Alcorn State. Boston College looks solid. They scored 34 points in the second quarter, winning against UMass, who UMass is not a terrible team. I think UMass in week 0 put up 63 points or something like that. So Boston College getting a 55-21 victory is pretty good. Pittsburgh against Albany. Pittsburgh come out, looked a little slow at first, they scored a lot of points at first, but really you could tell they were starting to sub in their players in the second half and get the 33-7 victory. But hopefully they can hold that. Maybe that just shows what they're saving players for next week. And then we've already talked about North Carolina and California. Richmond and Virginia. Virginia gets a 42-13 win over Richmond. I don't know anything about Richmond, but I do know the last few years, maybe the last 10 years, they've been a solid FCS team. But Virginia gets a win big there, and a little momentum maybe for the Cavaliers. Now on Monday night, Labor Day night, we do have Virginia Tech and Florida State, and I am on Virginia Tech, which at this rate, the way everything went yesterday, you may want to think about fading. But hopefully they can come out and stay within the 7.5 and get a victory there for us as far as against the spread. So that's everything ACC related. Now, we talked about a couple things that happened as far as takeaways. And one thing that I hope that everybody takes away from week 1 is not to overreact. That happens a lot. I've got some adjustments to make as far as my predictions, some of my projected stats. I feel like I need to adjust a few of those. I looked at everything yesterday. I had a lot of games showing to go over. A few of them went under. So what I'm doing is, like, for instance, when I say 70 yards rushing equals 1 touchdown, I'm going to bump that up to 75 or 80, trying to make that, bring it back down to realistic areas. So overreactions happen a lot. Michigan didn't play well yesterday. Texas didn't play yesterday well. We talked about those during this. Don't overreact to that. Don't say, well, they're going to go 0-12, because they're not. They're going to bounce back. Those teams that have this massive amounts of talent, if they didn't play well in week 1, they will tend to get better in week 2 and week 3 and kind of level out for the rest of the year. Teams that played very well against those teams, like Maryland, for instance, we don't expect a lot out of Maryland the rest of the season. But they played well week 1. So I guess what I'm saying is don't overreact and think Maryland is now a Big Ten contender, because they're not. They're not going to be. They played on a high yesterday. They played solid. They beat Texas. But those two teams did not reflect completely how that should have went. So I guess just take that in consideration when you're looking at week 2, week 3, and so on. Don't let that get in your head as that's the way things are going to go the rest of the year. Penalties were huge yesterday. There were teams getting penalties left and right. In that Auburn-Washington game, I think both of those teams ended up with 100-plus yards or somewhere near that in penalties. I know Alabama ended up with almost 100 yards, if not more, in penalties. That's something that'll get taken care of week 2. So that's something, you've got to take into consideration when handicapping these games as well. There's a lot of polls out right now, AP poll, coaches poll. I don't necessarily take that into consideration when I'm doing mine. I look at what all has been done. I wait until about week 4 before I put out my top 4 and what I really feel like, start separating some of these teams from each other. So don't always go off the polls. They can be very deceiving. Tonight, Miami is number 8. LSU is number 25. Let's see what happens. By default, if you're looking at those two rankings, Miami should win this game by, 10, 14 points, just by looking at the rankings. They're a 3.5-point favorite. So don't always go off of these rankings for what you're doing. Let's see what happens there. Let's watch and see how both these teams react. LSU's got a new quarterback. They've always have a good defense. Miami's got a good defense. They had a lot of turnovers last year. Let's see if they can continue that success, those type of things. So do not overreact to these teams from week 1 to week 2. As far as next week goes, there are some big games in my opinion. There's 13 matchups between Power 5 and Power 5. Some of the top games that I'm looking at: Georgia, South Carolina, Clemson, and Texas A&M. Texas A&M is going to be the game day game. I don't necessarily think that's going to be close. I think Clemson is going to take care of business, but that is a big game as far as nationally televised. USC, Stanford, Colorado, Nebraska. We'll finally get to see hopefully what Nebraska has with Scott Frost. Penn State and Pitt. That's an old rivalry there that's kind of got rescheduled a little bit here. Hopefully they continue that. And Iowa State and Iowa, both those teams pretty solid. Let's see what happens there. Iowa State didn't get to play yesterday. It'll be their first game out of the gate to start their 2018 season, so we'll see what they're all about. Some middle of the pack games, I would say Mississippi State, Kansas State. Unless Kansas State makes some big improvements this week, Mississippi State should take care of business. But we get to see what Mississippi State does with Fitzgerald, because it'll be his first game of the year. Michigan State, Arizona State. Michigan State didn't look as well. Arizona State did look a lot better than we thought. So maybe that's a decent game. Virginia, Indiana, low level. Not a lot of people's going to be watching that game, but that is two fairly similar teams in my opinion. And then Duke and Northwestern. Both those teams, I think Northwestern's got a little bit more upside to them, so we'll see what happens there. Games that I know none of you are going to watch, but they're still Power 5 versus Power 5. Florida, Kentucky. UCLA, Oklahoma. Oklahoma should just, that should be bad. And then Rutgers, Ohio State. Ohio State should take care of business there. That's everything for week 2 as far as coming up. Of course, on Wednesday, I plan on putting out another video. We'll see if we can't do a little better in week 2 than I did in week 1. But if not, we'll make more adjustments and move on from there. That's just how this kind of thing works. I really appreciate y'all watching this. If you didn't get to see the first half of the video, I invite you to go check it out. This will be uploaded pretty soon, and I'll get it sent out as far as Twitter and everything. Have a great Sunday. Miami, LSU tonight, Virginia Tech, Florida State tomorrow night. Have a great rest of your Labor Day weekend, and I will see you on Wednesday.